Aloha and welcome. I'm Lori Admiral, the Director of Philanthropy for the Nature Conservancy in Hawaii and Palmyra. We envision Hawaii and Palmyra as thriving, resilient ecosystems where native biodiversity flourishes, indigenous leadership and stewardship is supported, and communities are empowered to sustainably manage resources. I want to welcome all of you to this webinar today, all our friends in Hawaii, and those of you on the call from California, which is actually my home state. We're excited to have you join us today. The Hawaii and California chapters of TNC work in collaboration on many projects across the Pacific, and TNC's island resilience strategy is also involved in some of the work taking place at Palmyra Atoll. And now, welcome to Palmyra Atoll. Today, we're going to hear from Dr. Eric Conklin, Director of Marine Science for TNC, Hawaii, and Palmyra. Eric is going to provide an in-depth look at the innovative conservation science happening here, from island restoration to coral reef resilience to blue water research. This amazing body of work is a critical reason why Palmyra is a hope spot for TNC and for the world. Eric manages the Hawaii and Palmyra marine science teams, where he is building on the strength of both teams to provide cutting-edge science to inform, evaluate, and improve the effectiveness of our conservation teams. Eric holds a BS from Allegheny College and a PhD from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He was born in Ohio, grew up in Illinois, and now lives on Maui. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Eric.
Thank you very much, Lori, and thank you very much to everyone for taking the time out of your day to come and spend this time with us and learn about our conservation and science work at Palmyra. One thing I want to note right off the bat is what you're seeing right now is a population sign for Palmyra. It's one of the first things you see when you get off the plane at Palmyra. And I want to note that that population 35 is like the max possible population we can have on the atoll. It's normally somewhere between like 9 and 11. So it's a tiny little atoll in the middle of the Pacific. But we think, and hopefully you'll hear through this presentation, how we think this small area can make a really big difference to our global conservation efforts. But to take a step back, where on the earth is Palmyra? Well, it's 1,000 miles south of Hawaii, and it's a small tropical atoll. And for just to explain what that means, about 70 million years ago, there was a volcano in the Line Islands south of the Hawaiian island chain. One of those small volcanoes was the early Palmyra, and a fringe of coral grew around that volcano. Over time, over millions of years, that volcano subsided, but the coral that was surrounding it continued to grow and keep up with a rising sea level. And as a result, what we have now is a drowned volcano, but a fringe of coral that's still at the surface, forming the island or atoll of Palmyra. And that's what an atoll is. Palmyra is a United States territory, so it's part of the United States. It's also a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service refuge, and also part of the Pacific Islands Heritage Marine National Monument. So it's protected on a number of different levels. It's very remote. It's a refuge. It's a national monument, and it's those those layers of protection that are a big part of what makes Palmyra so special. So it's so protected, so remote, and yet surprisingly accessible. Only 2.5 hours away from the Honolulu International Airport, where you can jump into a private plane. You see that plane being loaded in the Honolulu Airport here on the left. You see folks in the plane heading on their way down to Palmyra on the right. And you take this small plane down to Palmyra, you land on our crushed coral runway, which was built by the military in World War II when Palmyra was a naval air station and is now maintained by TNC. And it's that runway that gives access to this incredibly remote place is a big part of what makes Palmyra special. Now, hopefully the people that you come down on that plane on are people that you really like and get along with, because those people and the small crew that manages the station and works on research and conservation projects on the atoll are the only people you're going to see while you're on the station and staying in a very small research station or camp with some, let's call them generously rustic cabins that are nestled within the rainforests of Palmyra and along the shoreline. And why would you take this flight down to Palmyra and stay in these rustic cabins in this small little camp with this tiny group of people? Well, it's because in the absence of people at Palmyra, you get a chance to be immersed in a place where nature rules. You'll see thriving ecosystems from tropical forests to reefs to lagoons to open ocean, all of which you can see in this photo right here. And you get to see how they're all interconnected and interdependent in ways that create great abundance and diversity, and in ways that are often hard to see in places where people have a heavier footprint. So Palmyra is a place where the whole is much greater than the sum of its parts, with all of these interconnected ecosystems and all of the connections between those systems, enhancing the resilience of the whole. But the parts themselves are pretty amazing. From tropical rainforest with towering native forests full of some of the most abundant seabird and land crab populations you'll find anywhere in the world, to coral reefs where predators dominate the system and huge schools of herbivores or algae-eating fish like you see here are keeping the reef healthy, and coral growth rates are among the highest ever recorded anywhere in the world, to blue water or open ocean systems where the huge marine protected area, blue water marine protected area that's surrounding Palmyra protects critical fishery species and creates foraging habitat for seabirds. Now, all of this is possible because of the long history of protection and restoration at Palmyra. TNC purchased the atoll in 2000 from private owners, immediately turned around and sold much of the land to the Fish and Wildlife Service to create a national wildlife refuge that also brought protection to the nearshore waters. And then the area was designated a Marine National Monument in 2009, which extended the marine protection out to 50 nautical miles beyond Palmyra. And at TNC, we feel we have an obligation to be good stewards of this amazing place, but also to understand and learn from it in a way that helps us better conserve, manage, and restore these ecosystems in other parts of the world. So we are working to achieve this by running the Climate Adaptation and Resilience Laboratory at Palmyra, making Palmyra a critical research center to the Pacific and beyond. And critically, we're looking to focus our work not just on cool science, but on the needs of Pacific Island communities. What are the things for natural resource management that they're struggling with? What are they looking for answers for? How can we use what we have at Palmyra to help? So we're trying to do that by leveraging Palmyra's unique position as the world's most accessible yet highly protected area with very few human impacts to foster invaluable partnerships and develop conservation insights that we and our partners can share globally. Now, this work would not be possible without those partnerships. And I just want to say how grateful we are to our many partners. You can see on the slide here. These are some of the best researchers in their fields from around the world, innovative companies, premier natural resource management agencies from the US. And throughout this presentation, I'm going to be saying we a lot. And I just want to acknowledge right here that we encompasses this whole suite of incredible partners that are making invaluable contributions to our work. So we couldn't do much of this work and that I'm going to talk about in the following slides without these partners or without our conservation science volunteers. And this is a TNC volunteer program where we bring early career aspiring researchers and natural resource managers down to Palmyra, where they spend 6-month rotations on the atoll and play an invaluable role in the day-to-day data collection and maintenance of long-term research and conservation projects at the atoll, as well as support the work of our research partners that they're doing on and around the atoll. All of this collective effort by all of these partners is in service of our shared vision, which is a place where Palmyra is a conservation innovation hub and hope spot, a place that teaches us how to better protect islands, reefs, and oceans around the world, and that inspires us about the true power of nature. And that last point is really important because it's so easy to find stories of doom and gloom in the world these days with the changing climate and everything that else is happening. And it's harder to find those stories of hope. And we really do see Palmyra as a story of hope. It too was affected by our changing climate and all the ways in which people are increasingly affecting our planet. But to date, Palmyra has been remarkably resilient and continues to thrive despite these challenges, showing us the true power of nature. When we get out of the way, nature can do so much. And we want to learn the lessons of what makes Palmyra so resilient so that we can share those insights with researchers and managers that are working to conserve similar ecosystems around the world and the communities that rely on them for their sustenance, culture, and economies. Now, this is really critical because for all that we believe Palmyra provides us many stories of hope, there is indeed a crisis in the Pacific and tropical island, atoll, and ocean ecosystems around the world. Um, these systems and the communities that rely on them are on the front lines of climate change. These are sensitive ecosystems that are heavily affected by ocean warming and sea level rise and a host of other threats. And we see atolls as the sort of canaries in the coal mines, the early warning signs that our planet is changing and we need to learn how to adapt with it. Now, coral reefs themselves are already under critical threat and in grave danger. Coral reefs represent less than 0.1% of the ocean and yet are home to 25% of all marine species. Hundreds of millions of people around the world rely on them. And yet 50% of the world's coral reefs have been lost over the last 30 years, and 90% may disappear without significant action by 2050. There are a host of different things that contribute to those trends, but a really important one, and one that I'll be talking more about in this talk today, is coral bleaching. And to talk about that just a bit, the deal with coral bleaching is that all reef-building corals, coral animals, and anemone-like animals have symbiotic algae living within their tissues. Those symbiotic algae are what give them their color, the vibrant colors you see on the coral reef, and it's also what gives them the food they need in order to survive and grow reefs, the largest biological structures on the Earth. But that symbiosis between those coral animals and their symbiotic algae is very temperature sensitive. And when waters get too warm, that symbiosis breaks down and the corals expel those symbiotic algae. When that happens, the corals lose their color, which came from the algae, which is why they look pale or white or bleached. But they've lost their food source. Now they're not dead, but they are starving. And if the waters don't cool down and if they can't get those symbiotic algae back in time, then you will see major coral mortality. And coral bleaching is the only thing known anywhere in the world to cause mass coral mortality. And that's a big part of that 50% decline in the last 30 years. And the lion's share of that 90% decline by 2050 is that coral bleaching due to warming temperatures. But this talk isn't just about coral reefs. Islands are also biodiversity hotspots. 19% of bird biodiversity around the world is found on islands. 41% of highly threatened land vertebrates are found on islands. They have unique species that are at risk, and yet they also have great conservation potential. Islands as isolated systems are great places to do bold and innovative conservation interventions. And there's an urgent need now to figure out how to preserve these ecosystems, which is why TNC is so uniquely invested in island and reef conservation. With this slide right here showing you TNC's Pacific footprint in the shaded areas. And if we look at that footprint of TNC's work and compare it to the distribution of the world's atolls, now shown by these pink dots, what you see is that TNC's work, as it stands right now, already encompasses 40% of all of the world's atolls. And we've been very fortunate in the Palmyra program to work really closely with California's Island Resilience Strategy and their program. And that strategy is catalyzing and coordinating TNC's work on island conservation in Hawaii and Palmyra, in California, in Micronesia, in French Polynesia. And they're doing that work by engaging governments and communities and understanding the alignment with nature-based solutions to forest restoration challenges, by expanding the science that's foundational to restoring the resilience to island ecosystems, and by investigating and pursuing the economic and policy incentives for conservation interventions on islands. So not just coming up with good solutions, but working with island communities to make sure that they're actionable and applicable, not great ideas, but things that people can actually do and implement to improve their places. And so at TNC, we're trying to develop and demonstrate conservation solutions on our preserves and turn those into guidance for island managers and communities. And we really see Palmyra as a shining example of this, where we've seen tremendous success in our conservation interventions and research through the work that we've done as part of our Climate Adaptation and Resilience Laboratory, or CARL, which is some random dude's name, and also the name of our world-class climate adaptation laboratory. Now, there are 3 pillars for our work within the Climate Adaptation and Resilience Lab, and that's going to be the structure of the remainder of this talk. Those 3 pillars are island conservation, where we're really focused on seabird and terrestrial ecosystem restoration. coral reef resilience, where we're working to understand the coral reef ecology at Palmyra and what makes it so resilient to climate stressors. And then blue water research, where we're investigating the use of blue water marine protected areas, or MPAs, and their efficacy for protecting pelagic fishery species and maintaining coastal and open ocean connections that are critical to ecosystem health. And it's super important to note that while we have these three pillars, a big part of what we're trying to do with our work at Palmyra is understand how all of these systems are interconnected, interwoven, interdependent. For too long, we've managed systems as independent ecosystems, but they aren't and will never achieve our conservation goals if we keep on managing them as independent ecosystems without understanding and acknowledging and managing the connections between them. And Palmyra gives us a fantastic opportunity to see, study, and understand those connections. Again, seeking to understand how the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So an example of this that we can dive right into is our island conservation work, where Katie Franklin is leading the charge. And our tagline here is engineering a rainforest to protect a reef. And you might wonder, like, why are we talking about a reef when we're talking about island conservation? Well, because it turns out like a big part of the focus of our work is looking at those land-sea connections and how healthy forests are essential to healthy reefs. And a key connector here for us is that Palmyra's forest ecosystems are home to thriving seabird populations. Those seabirds spend all of their time foraging tens or hundreds of miles offshore in the open ocean, eating fish, coming back to their roosting areas on Palmyra, where they're roosting in our forest habitat. They're pooping, their guano washes down and fertilizes the terrestrial ecosystem and makes for a healthy, vibrant forest. But nutrients from that also get washed by rain into that near-shore coral reef system, where it turns out research has shown that near-shore reefs that have seabird-derived nutrients are more healthy and more resilient to a changing climate. So a healthy reef very much depends on a healthy forest, which depends on a healthy seabird population, which depends on a healthy open ocean area where those seabirds can forage. Again, how all of these things are interconnected. To dig a little bit deeper into our island conservation work here, let's take a look at the forest. Where on Palmyra, the military occupation and around World War II and modifications to the island that were made around that, and then a subsequent era where folks were trying to do copra or coconut plantation work at Palmyra, created an island ecosystem where rats and coconuts were dominant. And that's what you can see on the left. But it turns out seabirds don't really get along well with rats and really don't like to nest in coconut palms. So one of the first big interventions that the Conservancy did at Palmyra was working with Island Conservation and the Fish and Wildlife Service. We eradicated rats from Palmyra in 2011, which created a whole host of changes in the ecosystem there. And we're now working with Fish and Wildlife Service to restore the native forest habitat. So we're turning the forest from that coconut-dominated monoculture that you see in the left side of this slide and turning it into a diverse native forest like you see in the right-hand side. And in that photo, you can see that there are many more seabirds flying in and over that native forest canopy on the right. And our restoration efforts of removing rats and restoring native vegetation are contributing to super abundant populations of seabirds, like we can see in this sooty tern colony here. So those restoration efforts have definitely are already showing big effects on our resident species. We have 11 resident seabird species, but we don't just want to improve the habitat for those 11 species. We also want to bring back some species we've lost. There's an additional 8 species of seabird that we think were lost to Palmyra over the last century due to habitat loss in the presence of rats. But now that the habitat is improving and the rats are gone, we're using social attraction measures like decoys and seabird collars to bring those species back. And we're only a handful of years into this, but we've already seen 5 of our 8 target species returning to Palmyra, with some of them even laying and hatching eggs at Palmyra. So it's really exciting to see that bird life return with the restoration of the habitat. The restoration techniques that we've developed at Palmyra for this work are now being used by Tetiaroa in French Polynesia, and the island resilience team is putting together guidance that can be shared with island and atoll managers across the Indo-Pacific to share the lessons that we learned and provide guidance to other managers on how to do similar work in their places. Now, growing the bird family isn't restricted to just these seabirds, however. All of the work restoring the forest habitat at Palmyra has made the atoll an ideal place to save critically endangered forest bird species like the bokiko-kiko and sea heck that you see pictured here. Now, to be clear, these species are not native to Palmyra, but they are endangered and in desperate need of a home where they can be safe. And Palmyra doesn't have competing native forest birds that could be displaced by these. So the bokiko-kiko is a 2-island endemic that only lives on a couple of islands that are part of the Line Island chain where Palmyra is. So just a couple of islands down to the southwest of where Palmyra is. But it's endangered there because of habitat loss and the presence of rats. So our Palmyra program is working closely with the government of Republic of Kiribati right now to explore the potential for bringing bokiko-kiko to Palmyra, which would be its only predator-free habitat and might be essential for preserving this species into the future. And then TNC's Island Resilience Team is leading our work with partners and the people of Guam to save the sea heck. Now, this is a single island endemic, meaning it has only ever lived on the island of Guam, but it is extinct in the wild because the introduction of the brown tree snake to Guam many decades ago led to the decimation of the forest bird population there. And in 1988, the last sea heck was pulled out of the forests in Guam, and a small population has been kept alive in captivity in zoos since then. Now, only about 140 sea heck remain alive in captivity, and no sea heck have flown free since the 1980s until now, when we worked with partners to bring 9 newly hatched sea heck to Palmyra just this past year, so that they could fly free for the first time in decades. And I'll let this video show you what happened next. So I just want to underscore how incredibly excited we are that that there are now sea heck living in the wild and thriving in the wild. Since the release last September of those 9 sea heck, 8 are now in mating pairs and building nests and laying eggs, with hopefully the first wild-born sea heck in decades arriving shortly. Now, the goal of this work is to save the species by giving it a temporary home on Palmyra while work is being done to restore its native habitat in Guam so that they can be safely returned to their rightful home. An opportunity that we wouldn't have if not for all the work that has gone into restoring and understanding the forest ecosystem of Palmyra. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, while the story of our forest work has in large part been about the active restoration of formerly impaired systems, much of our coral reef work is centered around understanding what makes the near pristine reef at Palmyra, which is a lot less human impact than the terrestrial realm did. What makes that coral reef so resilient to a changing climate. And Dr. Joe Pollack leads our work with partners to understand what drives that resilience at Palmyra. And to be clear, this reef is being affected by the global stressors that are affecting all reefs around the world, like rising sea temperatures and ocean warming. And yet to date, it has proven to be remarkably resilient to those effects. Now, resilience isn't just about not being affected, but it's also the ability to bounce back and recover. And there's a lot we still don't understand about what makes reefs more vulnerable or resilient to the effects of climate change. But some of the leading thinking is that local stressors, things like overfishing, wastewater inputs, and sedimentation from land, can impair the inherent resilience of reefs. Now, this is a really important point because it means that it's very common for coral reef managers around the world to say, climate change is kicking my butt. There's nothing I can do. But this research suggests that local management really matters. And yes, the global stressors are critically important, but the actions that we take at local scales can really make a difference and change the outcomes of our reefs. And Palmyra presents a really golden opportunity to gain insights into these kinds of issues by being able to study the resilience of a system that's largely free of those more localized stressors while still confronted to those global stressors, which gives us an opportunity to tease apart how reefs react to global stressors alone versus global stressors layered on all these other localized effects. And again, resilience is as much about recovery from climate impacts and learning what drives that recovery as it is about the resistance to change. So while a coral reef manager is never happy to see a bleaching event on their reef, we and our partners were poised and ready when a year and a half ago, an El Nino related warming event had again pushed Palmyra's reefs past their bleaching threshold. We were determined not to miss this invaluable opportunity to study how Palmyra responds to this and what makes it so resilient to bleaching events. Also, that we could understand the drivers of resilience and learn how to better manage the coral reefs around the world that people rely on. Now, a lot of that work is just old school, like getting in the water and diving on individual sites and taking a look at reefs like you see in the video here. But we're also leveraging cutting edge technology and remote sensing, bioacoustics, machine learning, computer visioning to learn from this bleaching event at the level of detail never before possible. Like you can see with this high resolution drone image paired with machine learning that allows us to map out the recovery across the entire atoll scale. Again, a scale that we've never been able to work at before. And with our partners, we're monitoring 60 sites across 7 different habitats throughout the atoll, all to give us that comprehensive picture of how Palmyra responds and understand those drivers of resilience to inform management and other places. Through this and related research on our coral reefs, we're also working with partners to develop new tools that help us understand and manage Palmyra's reefs and that can catalyze new technology to be exported to other reefs around the world. So one of the things we've done with our partners is build a digital model of the reef to optimize managing. You're seeing a static image of this dynamic model right here. And this model allows us to look at how currents flow through the atoll, which areas are staying cooler and therefore less likely to bleach, which areas are going to be warmer and therefore more likely to bleach. How is that going to change over time? If we were to do coral restoration, this model helps us predict where the larvae of that would end up, so that we would know like how large of an area we could affect with restoration efforts. As shorelines change with sea level rise, this model will help us understand sea level rise and management action. This model will help us understand how those kinds of shoreline changes will affect the functioning of the ecosystem in ways that will inform our management. And really importantly, the technology that we've developed to do this digital reef model here at Palmyra is now being used in Hawaii and Palau and Marshall Islands and Belize to develop similar products for managers in those places so that they can better manage their reefs. So with all of this work, we're looking for ways to scale our work to global impacts. And another series of examples of how we're trying to do that is in our Bluewater research program, which is led by Kid Pollock, no relation to Joe Pollock, who's doing the coral reef work. And again, the deal here is that Palmyra sits within a giant blue water marine protected area, or MPA. And these giant blue water MPAs are one of the core strategies for how agencies and organizations and governments are looking to meet global conservation goals. And what we would love to be able to do with Palmyra is answer the question of how can we make sure that these areas are as accessible as possible. Palmyra is an amazing place to ask this question because it's a tiny research station set in the middle of a giant blue water MPA, which makes it an ideal place to look at how the MPA is working and how all the species that we care about within these systems are interacting with that protected area. As you can see here with Kids' work to put a satellite tracking device on a giant blue marlin so that it can be released and see how its movements track against the protected area boundaries. So these protected areas are really important because many species depend on these open ocean areas, like seabirds that we were talking about, like this great frigate bird here, and a host of marine mammals like melon-headed whales that you see here, and of course, tuna and other key fishery species. which you don't see a tuna in this photo, but what you do see is a giant churn of water because there's a big school of tuna underneath the surface there, driving bait fish right up to the surface. The bait fish are trying to get away from the tuna, so they're jumping up into the air, which is what those red-footed boobies are swooping in to try to grab the fish as they're trying to escape the tuna. So what you're seeing here is that encapsulation of tuna and bait fish and seabirds, again, how all these systems are interconnected and how marine protected areas, these blue water marine protected areas, are an important part of maintaining that intact ecosystem from forest all the way out to open ocean. In order to better understand how this suite of species interact with the protected areas, we and our partners put satellite tracking tags on several key species and track their movements within and beyond the monument. So that's what you're seeing in this figure. So Palmyra is just a little above center with a little star and circle around it. And then you'll see a square, which is the demarcation of the Marine National Monument boundaries. And then the dotted line shows you the US exclusive economic zone. And then the different colored squiggles are the tracks of individuals of the different species, of some of the different species that we tracked. And so you can just follow some of those squiggles and see how far different species were traveling from Palmyra and how they were utilizing that habitat. So what you'll see here is that some species are reasonably well contained, like most of their movements are within that square, but expanding the area would provide better protection for others, the ones that are beyond the square, but within the EEZ, the dashed line. And one of the lessons here is that not one size fits all. It's really about understanding which species are you trying to protect, and then how do you best design an area to protect those species, and acknowledge that maybe these marine protected areas essential for some species aren't going to be the right strategy for all species, like that blue marlin that we saw in the previous photo. After it was tagged, it went 2,500 kilometers to the east in just about 60 days. No blue water MPA is going to protect that. We need to have a different strategy to address that. So figuring out how to better manage these large-scale MPAs is critically important to reach our ocean conservation goals. And also because the fishing industry is continually developing and deploying new technology to increase fish harvest, with one of the key techniques increasingly widely being deployed being fish aggregating devices, or FADs, FADs. Now, tens of thousands of these are being deployed by the purse seine tuna fishing fleet every year. These FADs are rafts that drift on ocean currents, and as they're drifting through ocean currents, they're attracting fish. It's perfectly legal to deploy these on one side of the monument, have them drift through the monument and collect them and any fish they may have accumulated on the other side of the monument. So we're really interested in understanding the interaction between FADs and the protected area. And all of these FADs, fish aggregating devices, have satellite tracking and sonar fish finder buoys on them so that you can track not just the position of each of these rafts, but also get a sense for how many fish are contained by that, are being aggregated by that. So that the fishing industry uses that to say, hey, now I know it's worth our time to go and collect the fish around that FAD. But through an exciting and innovative collaboration, that purse seine fishing industry is sharing the data with us, with TNC, on the FAD positions and how many fish they are as they move through the monument, which allows us also to track their movement and see how it relates to the monument. So what you see here on the left is just that a single a fish aggregating device, and the track as it enters into the monument, and that upper right sort of comes down, swirls around just to the southeast of Palmyra, which you can see just sort of north and left of center, before it sort of keeps on following ocean currents before it leaves the monument down and to the lower right-hand side. Now that's the track of a single FAD. If we look at the tracks of all of the FADs that have passed through the monument since we started tracking them in 2021, the figure looks like this. I think you can get the impression that, hey, this is really important. There's a lot of FAD activity out here, so we really do need to understand what's going on with that. And it's the collaboration with the purse seine fishing industry allows us to look at that interplay between these FADs, our satellite tracking of the fish and other species that we're tracking within the monument, and how that all sort of works together to understand how best to manage these systems. One other thing to know about these fads is that a big part of what attracts the fish to them are these long tails that are hanging off of the fad. So you can see that in this photo here. Um, and these fads drift on ocean currents, and if currents push them towards reefs, they will ground on reefs and can cause major damage, like you see in this photo to the right here. So that's you'll see branching coral on either side of that sort of mowed down swath of rubble that's in the middle of that image, and that's damage to Palmyra's reef from a grounded fad. So um, uh, uh, So with tens of thousands of fads being deployed every year, most of which are never recovered, these reef strikes are a big and growing problem. And, and also a new way in which these open ocean and coral reef systems are connected by these fads coming out of the open ocean and grounding on reefs. And in response to this, KID created the Fad Watch program. And this is a program where the fishing industry is not only sharing information on where fads are and how many fish they've accumulated, but they've also given us permission to intercept them when they are on a collision course with the reef at Palmyra. And I'd like to underscore how important that collaboration is. Like, we don't want to see the fishing industry as the villains in this. They understand there's an issue, and they've been really good partners at understanding what they can do and what they can provide to us so that we can come up with an effective strategy for minimizing this damage. So I'd like to share a video with you that some of our partners created to give you a sense of what a fad recovery on Palmyra looks like. This is from a fad recovery from last year, and our partners put some captions in here, so please don't get too distracted by that or by me if the captions are more interesting. And so the way this program works is that KID tracks fads with this online interfaces and identifies ones that are on a collision course. That was one of those GPS buoys that you just saw right there. The team goes out from the Palmyra station using the latest GPS information and finds the fads. This also gives them a chance to see what's on the fad and what kinds of species are associated with fads, which is obviously one of the things that we're interested in. But it also gives us the chance to intercept them. This is not just a problem with Palmyra. American Samoa, French Polynesia, and the Cook Islands are all looking to implement Fad Watch programs based on the model that we've developed at Palmyra. So this is about saving or minimizing damage to our reef at Palmyra, but it's also very much about creating a model to address a problem that Pacific Island nations are increasingly facing. So here you just see the crew bringing the fad on board. There's nothing fancy about this. This is just muscling up this giant fad. Those tails can be 200 feet long, and bring it on board and bring it back to the station. To date, the program has brought in over 60 fads that have been intercepted before striking Palmyra, and over 8,000 feet of gear, like you see being pulled off the boat right now, that would have been entangled on the reef of Palmyra, crushing our coral. One of the things that's really exciting about the project is the GPS and sonar buoys that are recovered are being sent to artisanal fishing villages in Micronesia, who use them as part of anchored fads that they can position offshore and use the GPS positioning and the fish finders to know when it's productive to go offshore to fish for more sustainable offshore fish to reduce the fishing pressure on nearshore coral reefs. Which we're really excited about. And that's in a nutshell, what we're really trying to do at Palmyra is develop science and conservation interventions that help us be good stewards of Palmyra, but that also benefit people around the world. And the same way that the ecosystems of Palmyra are all interconnected, our global conservation community is also connected. And I hope the work that I've shared with you here today gives you a sense of hope and a demonstration of the ways in which we're trying to learn from Palmyra to help keep our oceans and our communities healthy, and the things that we can do together as we're thinking globally and working towards ambitious but essential conservation goals. The work is urgent because islands and atolls are on the front lines of climate change, and we want to be on the front lines of solutions as well. The work can look really different. It can be high-minded science, it can be technological innovation, or it can just be rolling up your sleeves and putting some muscle behind dragging a fad off a reef like you see in this photo here. And it's really all about finding the right solutions for the right challenges and places and creating the right partnerships and collaborations to work towards shared goals. And that we see as the path for turning our vision for Palmyra into a reality that benefits Palmyra and our global conservation efforts. And hopefully you've gotten a sense from the things that we've shared here about how we're working towards that vision at Palmyra. Thank you all very much for your time and your interest in our work.
Ah, my camera's working. Mahalo, Eric. Fantastic.
Good to see you, Lori.
Are you ready for some questions? Great. We've got a few. Let's start with this one. Given climate change, which includes rising seas, how long will Palmyra Atoll be above sea level?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, the easy answer is I don't know. The slightly longer answer is that atolls are fundamentally formed by corals keeping up with rising sea levels over time, and as long as atolls stay healthy and coral reefs are thriving, there's a very good chance that atolls can continue to persist and keep up, even in spite of a changing climate. There was just a study that was done, just published just this past year, that looked at 184 atolls, and 40% of them were losing area, 40% of them were staying pretty stable, and 20% were even growing. So it's not as simple as rising sea levels means the end of these ecosystems. Well-managed and healthy systems may very well be able to persist. Atolls are dynamic systems, like the shorelines might shift, some areas of islands may grow while others shrink. But as long as we're willing to adapt along with these systems, we think that Palmyra has a good chance of persisting long into the future.
When warm water causes corals to expel their symbiotic algae, where do they find more symbiotic algae? And when the water gets colder, does the expelled algae die in warm waters too?
That's a really good question. And it's a very active body of research. So I may not have the most up to date, but fairly up to date is that we don't know. Folks haven't found the symbiotic algae, Symbiodinium, in open ocean water samples. So it's a little bit of a mystery. And it's a little bit of a mystery whether the corals find new symbiotic algae in the water and bring them into their tissues, or if there are just a handful of those symbiotic algae still living within their tissues. And if conditions improve, they can grow and replicate and repopulate the coral. We don't really know. One of the reasons why targeted conservation science is so important to inform our actions as we try to better understand and manage these systems.
Thank you. How did you get rid of the rats at Palmyra?
Lots and lots and lots of rodenticide. That lots of studies beforehand looking at any impacts to the native wildlife, which there wasn't any. And then one of the things, there was actually an earlier attempt earlier in the 2000s that failed. And one of the lessons learned from that is the original attempt was just a whole bunch of rat traps set out with rodenticide all around the atoll, on the ground floor. But it turns out there's all kinds of rats that just live 100% in the treetops in the canopy and never ever come down. So they never ever saw those bait stations, and so they weren't controlled. So that was one of the big lessons, was yes to the traps, but also helicopters going out and deploying rodenticide in treetops, and people out there with crossbows and bolas getting rodenticide up into the forest canopy. Again, it's another example of how you really need to understand how the ecosystem functions in order to effectively manage it.
And they're still eradicated, correct?
They are still eradicated. There have been no signs of rats since the 2011 eradication. And the team actually just came back on Saturday from a trip to just sort of take a look at our biosecurity protocols and sort of kick the tires and think about what things can we do to sort of beef up the protocols. There haven't been any rats, but let's not rest on our laurels. Let's make sure we're always thinking about how to make sure none get down there. And if any ever did, we'd know as soon as possible and be in a position to deal with that before they can reestablish.
What did the US military do on the island during World War II? Did they have a weather station?
Oh boy, what didn't they do? I mean, the primary thing was a naval air station. So this was Palmyra was a place where military Navy planes could fly as a refueling station to do patrols all across the Central Pacific. What they did in order to support that was a massive dredging and sort of reshaping of the atoll. Military dredging doubled the land area and tripled the land volume of Palmyra. It took these atoll of separate little islets and connected them into a giant horseshoe of entirely connected atolls and causeways running between them to make it easier to get to and from. So that's been a big part of the restoration efforts is as the atoll sort of reclaims its natural form, how do we facilitate that? How do we adapt to that? And how do we deal with some of those legacy effects?
Is illegal fishing a problem?
It's a good question, and we have worried about that a lot over the years. There certainly have been instances where there was sort of suspicious activity, like far out on the horizon, or weird radio signals coming through that made us worry that illegal fishing within the monument it was definitely a concern. But we haven't seen much evidence of it. And the U.S. Coast Guard has been historically been pretty good about if we think there are illegal activities, they will actually run surveillance trips from Honolulu down to Palmyra to surveil the monument and see if they can spot illegal fishing activity. It's another one of the reasons why just partnerships and relationships are so important, so that we know who to call if we've got concerns and they're ready to respond.
Yeah. What do you do with the fad trash?
Um, that is also a good question. There's a couple of different things. One is we're working really closely with a researcher from the University of Hawaii, Jennifer Lynch, who's doing plastics recycling. And so part of it is looking for opportunities to bring some of that plastic debris, and Hawaii Pacific University as well, um, uh, bring that plastic debris back to Honolulu where it can be recycled and where we can do analyses to figure out where the different plastics are coming from. Honestly, part of it, some of it just gets burned, which is our best option for dealing with some of the trash that we have on the atoll. And believe me, none of us are really happy about that. But when you do the math on the sort of the ecological footprint, burning small amounts of trash from a small research station is a lower carbon footprint than sending a ship down to pick it up to bring it back to Hawaii to deal with. So we're always looking for ways to minimize our footprint. Right now, that's what we've got.
Is there other data models or projects the fad tracking is being used for?
Um, hmm. Um, One of the things that we are doing right now that we're really excited about is we're just starting a collaboration with NASA, who's using their high resolution satellite tracking and current modeling to take what we're collecting and the information that we're getting from the fishing industry, as well as new current drifters that we're deploying to refine their current models for the entire Central Pacific. The hope with that is that if we can better understand bad movements and current dynamics and all of that, that we'll be better able to, well, we'll have a better handle of Central Pacific ocean currents and be able to use those to better map out where sort of bad hotspots are and which reefs across the entire Pacific are at greatest risk. And we see this as one of the critical sort of scaling steps is if NASA is able to use our data in collaboration to develop this tool, that gives us that much more to take to other interested island nations as part of a package that they can apply to better protect their reefs.
What are the dominant native tree species on Palmyra?
Oh, I mean the big driver that for the forest that we think really makes Palmyra special is the Pisonia grandis trees. It's like one of the biggest Pisonia populations that you'll find in the Pacific. And so that's like the main canopy structure. I mean, we'll get other things like Ternifordia and things like that that are important components, but it's really that Pisonia that we're really really focused on. And that was one of the really exciting things about the rat eradication is actually for a couple of decades, like there were these large existing Pisonia trees, but no one ever saw Pisonia seedlings. And then the rats went away, and all of a sudden there were Pisonia seedlings all over the place, like a 5,000% increase. And like literally, I didn't just make that number up. Increase in Pisonia seedlings seen on Palmyra. So that was one of those really exciting responses of the ecosystem, like remove the rats, and all of a sudden, that whole forest ecosystem's like, oh, now I can breathe again. And it's been a big part of the resurgence of that system.
Are there mosquitoes on Palmyra, and do they pose a threat to sea heck?
There are mosquitoes on Palmyra. There aren't many, and and there isn't any avian malaria, so they do not pose a risk to the sea heck. There's the mosquito control technique that's actually now being deployed in Hawaii to help preserve critically endangered Hawaiian forest birds. That a lot of that technology and the Nature Conservancy's relationship with the company that's developing that technology actually started on Palmyra. Like the initial vision was to eradicate mosquitoes from Palmyra, from the entire atoll. But as we sort of worked through that and all that, it's like we can still do that, but we recognize that the greater urgent need was protecting Hawaii's critically endangered forest birds. We'll get to Palmyra and eradicating mosquitoes from Palmyra at some point, but right now the focus is on deploying and refining that technique in Hawaii, where but for that technique, we'd be at great risk of losing species forever. We don't have that risk at Palmyra.
Yeah. Are there any threats to sea heck?
Only other sea heck. Turns out they're pretty territorial and they can get in fights. But it's fine. There's plenty of forest. There's 9 of them. They're working it out. No, it's a remarkably benign environment for them. And that was one of the big concerns, right? Is like before they were left, they were kept in the aviaries that you saw in the videos, and like they were being hand fed and weighed and all that. And one of the big concerns was when they get released, are they going to be stressed out? Are they going to find food? They've literally never been in the wild before. And it turns out, yeah, they do great. Their instincts kicked right in. They were gaining weight right off the bat and thriving.
Do we know the temperature sensitivity of coral for the bleaching to occur? I'm curious how many degrees we're dealing with.
Yeah, it's so it turns out the bleaching threshold for corals is tied to what the coral is used to. So a coral that has always lived in a warmer environment is going to have a different threshold than a coral that's always lived in a cooler environment. But there's a pretty robust result, which is that if the temperature rises more than 1 degree Celsius beyond the maximum monthly mean, so the maximum temperature that a coral would normally experience, that's the bleaching threshold. And then the likelihood of bleaching is a combination of how far above that threshold you are and for how long. So it's both a combination of how hot and how long. A low level, short time above that bleaching threshold, probably not a big deal. A long period of time above that bleaching threshold, a much bigger deal. Or going way above that threshold, a much bigger deal.
I think we have time for one more question. Are there or have there ever been Native Pacific Islanders on Palmyra? And if yes, how do they inform your work with traditional knowledge?
That's an excellent question. And it's one of the things that we're actively working right now to try to better understand and develop a better strategy for. There's no evidence that there was ever a permanent Polynesian population, Islander population on Palmyra. but there's every reason to think that Palmyra would have been used as a stopping point or a way station on Pacific voyaging. So no to any knowledge of there being a population, but yes, absolutely to being an important place and have that cultural connection to Pacific Island voyaging. And we're in the midst right now of trying to figure out how to better reflect and honor that in our work and our approach. We have had things like Polynesian Voyaging Society like brought the hokulea down to Palmyra a few years back, and we have been bringing like local leaders to Palmyra and those sorts of things. But it's I think we'd all love to have a more sort of thoughtful, structured program reflecting that Pacific heritage.
Okay, we'll have one more because we've got a couple more minutes. Is there a coral reef ecosystem anywhere in the world that comes close to Palmyra's condition and has commercial airline access?
Oh, commercial airline access. Um, uh, Not that I'm aware of. There may be others on this call. I've seen some names pop up that have some ideas on that. But in my mind, that's really what makes Palmyra special. It's not that there's no other reef like it. There are other reefs that are really remote and really protected and really resilient. But it's that and the airstrip accessible by those small private planes. It's that accessibility to remoteness that makes Palmyra so unique and why we're so focused on making sure that we make the most of this incredible opportunity to learn as much as we can.
Eric, we could keep going with questions. There's so many, and I'm sorry we don't have more time. I'm sure many people would love to have their questions answered. We might have to just come back again and do this another time. But mahalo,
Perfect, we'll do.
mahalo, Eric, and mahalo to everyone for joining us to learn more about the innovative science happening at Palmyra. If you could please just take a moment to answer a few questions before signing off, we'd really appreciate it. Mahalo, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, everyone.